From 2008, when a rogue Russian missile nearly ignited into a nuclear blast over the skies of Europe, to an unknown virus-jumping species at an unknown location. Here are a few events that brought our world to 0 hour. The Cuban Missile Crisis. In October of 1962, the United States and the Soviet Union came closer than ever before to a nuclear exchange that would have ended all human life on Earth. For weeks, American spy planes had been monitoring construction work in Cuba. And although at first it appeared to be a new road, within days it became apparent that the Soviets were actually constructing multiple medium-range ballistic missile sites. After making the decision to remove the missiles by force, if necessary, President Kennedy assembled his top advisors for a meeting at his vacation home in Massachusetts. On October 16th, the U.S. began naval blockades around the island, stopping all traffic. 4 days later, Kennedy announced the discovery of the missiles and the quarantine of the island. The world was thrown into chaos. With each passing day, tempers flared as Soviet ships approached the blockade. Tensions finally eased on October when Premier Khrushchev agreed to remove the missiles from Cuba in exchange for the removal of American Jupiter missiles from Turkey. Historians believe that only the avoidance of miscommunication between the two superpowers averted a nuclear apocalypse. Rogue AI? What if your phone stopped working? Imagine going about your normal daily routine, getting ready for work or school, checking your phone to see what time it is, or looking up directions to make sure you are not late. But every time you touch your phone, instead of the familiar chime or vibration, you're met with a dark screen and a low battery symbol. At first, you assume the worst, that maybe you left your charger plugged into the wall after leaving the house this morning. So you plug it in, but still nothing. It doesn't turn on. This may sound like a dystopian nightmare, but in 2016, millions of people experienced this exact scenario when a widely used mobile operating system suffered a massive global outage. Millions of users reported their phones had completely crashed, and no amount of troubleshooting or restarting the phone seemed to fix the problem. It turned out that the glitch was caused by a failed software update that the company pushed out to its servers. Fortunately, the company fixed the bug within a few hours of its release. But this near disaster highlights the importance of cybersecurity in our increasingly technological world. What if the malicious actors responsible for this attack hadn't made a mistake? What if they had known that this bug would cause mass panic rather than just minor inconvenience? In such a situation, it is likely that more drastic measures would have been taken by the government, and possibly even military intervention would have been needed to restore order. We rely on technology for so much now that even small hiccups can throw society into disarray. Just imagine if this attack had targeted critical infrastructure, such as power grids or emergency services. The consequences would have been catastrophic. Thankfully, we live in a time where such attacks are rare. But as we become more reliant on technology, we need to ensure that the systems we depend on are secure. Because when you think about it, some of the most destructive viruses out there aren't biological at all. They're bits of code written by people with bad intentions. Birds aren't real. On January 28, 2011, a military transport plane carrying 67 tons of highly contagious H5N1 bird flu arrived at a research facility in Rotterdam. The cargo was to be used to cull birds in the surrounding area who had contracted the disease. But somehow, the cargo door opened during transit, and thousands of infected birds were released into the city. Immediately, authorities began rounding up the loose birds and placing them under quarantine. But it soon became clear that it was too late. Wild birds had already carried the virus far and wide. The outbreak spread rapidly, and soon authorities were considering the unthinkable. If the virus mutated to become airborne, it could quickly spread around the globe, killing hundreds of millions of people. To prevent this, experts began culling millions of healthy birds as well. Eventually, the outbreak was contained, and the world was saved from a potential pandemic. But the incident highlighted just how close we were to disaster: nuclear annihilation. On September 26, 1983, an unknown malfunction triggered the Soviet early warning system, signaling an imminent nuclear strike from the United States. Seconds later, an automated alarm sounded in the duty officer's room at Moscow's command center. Stunned, he checked the display and saw the same message: America has launched missiles. His heart pounded in his chest. He knew that protocol dictated that he should immediately report the alert to his superiors. But something in him, perhaps a sense of disbelief, made him hesitate for those few precious seconds. While he deliberated, the clock ticked away. It showed that the missiles were already on their way, that in less than 15 minutes, they would hit their targets. Unable to shake off his growing sense of foreboding, the duty officer decided to double-check the readings. As he did, a second alarm sounded, this one indicating that the initial report was false. He breathed a sigh of relief. The attack was a drill. A moment's hesitation could have resulted in nuclear war. Lost in space. In October of 1997, NASA's Mars Pathfinder landed on the surface of the Red Planet. Its mission was to explore the rocky landscape and search for signs of water, a key ingredient in the search for extraterrestrial life. But shortly after landing, the rover began to experience technical difficulties. Its batteries were draining faster than expected, and its solar panels weren't able to keep them charged. With each passing day, the rover came closer to death as its power reserves dwindled. Then suddenly, just when all hope seemed lost, the rover sprang back to life. It had entered a sleep mode to conserve energy, and then woken up just in time to save itself. Had engineers not noticed and reset the rover manually, it might have died right then and there. But the incident highlighted just how close NASA had come to losing its most valuable Mars rover just months after it landed. Pandemic 0 Hour. In February of 2020, the World Health Organization declared the novel coronavirus a public health emergency of international concern. At the time, there were only a few dozen cases of the virus outside of China. But within weeks, the number of cases would explode. As countries scrambled to contain the outbreak, the WHO declared the outbreak a pandemic. But even as the virus spread around the world, many countries took drastic measures to prevent it from reaching their shores. The United States closed its borders to most travelers from China and Europe. Australia implemented one of the strictest lockdown orders in the world. But despite these measures, the virus continued to spread. By April, more than 3 million people had been infected and over 200,000 had died. But as the months passed, it became clear that the pandemic wasn't as deadly as first feared. Vaccines were developed and economies began to reopen. But the pandemic's impact on the world was undeniable. Millions of people had lost their lives. Economies had been devastated and societies had been transformed. But as the dust settles, it's important to remember just how close we were to disaster. If the virus had been more deadly, if vaccines had not been developed so quickly, or if the pandemic had coincided with another major global crisis, the outcome could have been catastrophic. Solar superstorm. On February 18, 2021, a massive solar storm struck the Earth. Although it didn't cause the widespread blackouts that some feared, it did cause major disruptions to communications and power systems around the world. The solar storm was caused by a massive eruption on the surface of the sun, which sent billions of tons of charged particles hurtling towards the Earth. These particles interacted with the Earth's magnetic field, causing it to glow in an eerie green light. The aurora was so bright that it could be seen as far south as Florida and Mexico. But the beauty of the aurora belied the danger that the solar storm posed. If the storm had struck just a few days earlier or later, it could have caused widespread blackouts and disrupted critical infrastructure such as power plants and hospitals. As it was, the storm caught many by surprise, and officials had to scramble to protect the power grid from the effects of the solar radiation. Supervolcano. In August of 1980, Mount St. Helens, a volcano in Washington state, erupted, killing 57 people and causing over $1 billion in damage. It was the deadliest eruption in U.S. history and one of the most violent natural disasters in the country's history. But what if the eruption had been even more deadly? What if it had happened just a few hours earlier when more people were in the area? Or what if the eruption had been even more powerful, sending ash and debris hundreds of miles through the air? In the surrounding states, this could have led to widespread crop failures and contaminated water supplies. And even further afield, the ash could have disrupted air travel and caused major economic disruption. Although it's impossible to say how bad things could have gotten, it's thus clear that the 1980 eruption was just one major event away from becoming a true super disaster. We hope you enjoyed learning about some of the events that brought our world to 0 hour. Did any of these scenarios keep you up at night? Let us know in the comments below. Be sure to stay tuned for more videos like this one. Thanks for watching.